Hello, namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. After endless headlines and drama, the verdict is out. And no, I'm not talking about the Indian election. We have one more round of voting before the verdict next week. I'm talking about Donald Trump. He's been found guilty in the hush money case. Does that mean he will go to jail? Can he still contest the presidential election? We'll answer all these questions and more. In India, concerns over China's latest deployments. It has lined up fifth-generation fighter jets along the Sikkim border. What is Beijing trying to do and how will New Delhi respond? Meanwhile, a very good day for the Indian economy. The GDP numbers are out and at 8.2% growth, India beat all expectations. Also, 100 tons of our gold kept in the Bank of England has been brought back home. In the Russia-Ukraine war, the threat of an escalation. After France and Germany, it seems the US too has green-lighted Kiev's attacks into Russian territory. In South Africa, election results pour in along expected lines. The ruling ANC will need a coalition partner. Who will it be? In the AI war, Saudi Arabia joins hands with China to challenge OpenAI. In the UK election, leaders flock to TikTok to woo young voters. India is wrapping up the world's biggest election. We bring you the highlights. And as we head into the weekend, let's explore the idea of alone time. The headlines first. The Houthis say they've attacked an American carrier in the Red Sea, claims it is in response to US and British strikes on Yemen on Thursday. More than 15 people died in those strikes. Since November, the Houthis have been targeting ships in the Red Sea. In response, the US and the UK have launched retaliatory attacks on the rebels. Several people injured in a knife attack in Germany, reportedly including a far-right activist. The attacker was also injured after the police shot him. This incident comes just days before elections to the European Parliament. Germany has seen a spate of attacks on politicians in the run-up to the election. France bans Israeli firms from an upcoming defense fair. 74 Israeli defense companies were set to attend this event next month. It comes just days after Israel bombed a refugee camp in Gaza. The incident had sparked international outrage and protests in France. China will not attend the Ukraine Peace Conference in Switzerland next month. Beijing says the summit does not meet expectations. It wants both Russia and Ukraine to take part, but Moscow has not been invited for the talks. Former Iranian Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani launches a presidential bid. Polls are due next month after Ibrahim Raisi's death in a helicopter crash. But Larijani's candidacy must be approved by the Guardian Council. He was among the candidates the council had disqualified before the 2021 election, which Raisi had won. And no respite from the heat in India. More than 50 people have died due to suspected heat stroke across the country. The national capital has been witnessing record high temperatures. The heat wave is expected to continue till Saturday.
Very innocent man.
I think it's all a sham.
Justice been served. Justice been served.
It's a historic day in the United States, but not in a good way. A New York court has convicted Donald Trump. Nothing like this has ever happened before. No former president had ever been tried or convicted in America, so Trump is the first. And it's a lot more than just a legal case. It's a politically charged controversy, one that could determine America's political future. So let's break it down for you. First of all, three important questions. What is the case about? Will Trump go to jail? And can he still run for president? Trump was facing 34 charges in New York, 34. All of them were linked to the same case of paying hush money. In 2006, Donald Trump had a sexual encounter outside marriage. The woman was a porn star named Stormy Daniels. No one knew about this for a long time, but in 2016, Trump ran for president. And he feared that news of that encounter would leak. So what did he do? He paid hush money to the woman, basically paid her to be quiet, which is not illegal. It is how he paid her this money that landed him in trouble. Trump falsified business documents, and that was the charge against him. The prosecution built quite a strong case. They called 20 witnesses in total. One of them was Trump's fixer, the man who paid this hush money in 2016. So the case ended in conviction. Trump was found guilty, which brings us to question number 2. Will Donald Trump go to jail? Highly unlikely. The maximum punishment is 4 years in jail, but that's pretty rare. Judges often give a few months or even a fine. And in this case, it's not just any convict we're talking about, it's Donald Trump. He's a senior citizen and a former president, so putting him in jail is a tough call. Also, Trump can appeal this verdict. His team has already signaled that they will do it. And if they do, things will get delayed. Trump's sentencing is slated for July 11th, but an appeal could push that back. Which brings us to the final question. Can he still run for president? Surprisingly, yes, he can. Being convicted or jailed does not disqualify you. It's quite different from India's system. Here, a conviction does disqualify you. You cannot run for office then. But that's not the case in America, so that's not a worry for Donald Trump. In fact, he's trying to weaponize this conviction. Trump has always pitched himself as a political outsider, as a man persecuted by the deep state. So this plays right into his narrative.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent, and I think it's just a disgrace.
Classic Trump, defiant as always. But how will this affect his election chances? Well, among his supporters, it's a boost. Many of them see this as a witch hunt. So the conviction will not move them. If anything, it will solidify their perception that this whole thing was rigged by Joe Biden. That's what Trump supporters believe. And we are already seeing evidence of that. After the verdict, people rushed to Trump's campaign website. They wanted to donate money. The traffic was so much that the website crashed. Eventually, the donations resumed, and guess how much the Trump campaign has raised? Almost $35 million. After the conviction, $35 million. Even on the streets, it's the same sentiment. Trump supporters are refusing to accept that he is guilty.
I think it's all a sham. I think they shouldn't be able to run election interference the way they are.
At the end of the day, it's only going to increase his support like every other time they indicted him.
He's actually going to win because it's in the public's eye how they're using this judicial system just to penalize him, to get him away from running for president again.
So Trump voters are unmoved. But what about the rest of America? Opinion polls show a tough fight between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So the focus is on swing states. You can't just depend on your core vote bank anymore. You need to get the fence sitters. Among them, this conviction could be a deal breaker. Let's look at some of the polls. YouGov has just published one. It says 50% Americans agree with Trump's conviction. They agree with the conviction. Only 30% disagree. The other poll is from January this year. It covers America's 7 swing states. And what did it find? 53% voters said they would not vote for Trump if he was convicted, and that number rose to 55% if he was jailed. So the big takeaway is this. Trump voters do not care about the conviction, but the swing voters do. The question is, how will these sentiments play out in the days ahead? A lot depends on the narrative, how Joe Biden and Donald Trump address this issue. Biden has not said much until now. The White House said it respects the rule of law. It's a very business-like statement. But in campaign season, don't expect that to continue. The tone will sharpen. Reports say Biden's aides are looking to capitalize. Going forward, they want to call Trump a criminal. Now, technically, that won't be wrong. But such strategies can backfire. I'm sure Trump will also refine his approach going forward. He too will weaponize this verdict. Talk about the irony. Two old white men, two unimpressive candidates, and they're giving America its most nail-biting election in years. There is a new threat from China, a new border provocation. This time it is on the Sikkim border in northeast India. There's another Chinese military buildup. We have fresh satellite images from a Chinese airfield in Shigatse. It is Tibet's second largest city, less than 150 kilometers from the Sikkim border. Now look carefully. Can you see those planes? These are Chinese J-20 stealth fighters. They're China's most advanced fighter jets, the J-20s, better known as the Mighty Dragon. These are fifth-generation warplanes. And why is that significant? Because India does not have any fifth-generation fighter. So technologically, these planes are the most advanced. On paper, at least, they give China air superiority over India. Here is what the J-20 fighter jet can do. It can carry China's most advanced missiles. It can strike targets up to 300 kilometers away. However, its biggest advantage is its stealth capability. This plane can avoid radar detection. Experts say China is only the third country in the world with stealth fighters. The other two are the US and Russia. They have planes with similar technology. The Indian Air Force does not have a fifth-generation fighter. The new Rafale fleet comes the closest to what we have. It is a 4.5 generation fighter. So China is part of a unique club, and it is leveraging this advantage on the border with India. The PLA has more firepower deployed near Sikkim. There are other fighter planes like the J-10 warplane. There's also an early warning and control aircraft. And this deployment is large enough to spark concerns in New Delhi. These satellite pictures are also recent. They were clicked just 4 days back on the 27th of May. Some observers say that China could have deployed ground crew and support equipment at this base. Now, these are all worrying developments. It effectively means that China has opened a third front on the border with India. It began with eastern Ladakh in 2020. China is yet to pull back troops from there, from eastern Ladakh. Over the past year, Beijing has stepped up pressure on India in Arunachal Pradesh as well. Again, this is an Indian state in the northeast. China claims the whole of Arunachal Pradesh. They call it South Tibet.
The southern Tibet region is Chinese territory, and the Chinese government has never recognized and firmly opposes the so-called Arunachal Pradesh illegally established by India. The China-India border issue remains unresolved, and India has no right to unilaterally develop the Chinese southern Tibet region.
And now we have Chinese fighter jets near Sikkim. This will hardly stabilize the border situation. In fact, it makes the border threat from China wider and permanent because the Chinese forces are clearly digging in. They're establishing a lasting presence along the entire length of the India-China border. The PLA has been working on this for a while. It has been focusing on building up military assets in two regions, Tibet and Xinjiang. Both share a border with India, Tibet and Xinjiang. In 2017, China launched a major infrastructure drive. It covered 37 locations in all. Beijing started building more airports and helipads in these locations. Where there were existing facilities, the PLA ordered upgrades. Reports say the pace of this construction picked up after 2020, the year when Indian and Chinese troops clashed in Ladakh. And now there could be more potential flashpoints. India's priority is to resist Chinese expansionism. New Delhi is working on two fronts here. First is border infrastructure. India is building more roads, highways and tunnels to improve the accessibility of these border areas for Indian troops. In the last 3 years, India has covered a lot of ground. A total of 330 infrastructure projects have been completed on the Indian side. So that is one priority, building infrastructure. The second priority is building up military deterrence. Beyond deploying more troops, India is upgrading its military infrastructure. It is fortifying air bases with hardened shelters. It is expanding air defenses. Last year, India completed the deployment of the S-400 air defense system. Now, this is a Russian-made surface-to-air missile defense system. India has 3 of these systems, the S-400, and they have been deployed along the borders with China and Pakistan. So, India is not defenseless against China's military aggression, but it must be on guard at all times against its hostile northern neighbor. There is good news on the economic front. India's growth has surpassed all expectations. The latest GDP data is out. India remains the world's fastest growing major economy. From January to March this year, India's GDP grew at 7.8%. For the entire financial year, the growth rate stood at 8.2%. Now, these figures beat all projections, including those of the International Monetary Fund and India's own central bank. They had predicted India's growth to be somewhere between 7 and 8%. It turned out to be 8.2%. There are 4 sectors that are driving this growth: manufacturing, mining, construction, and the services sector. They've all shown good numbers. So what does this mean for the government and for the people of India? For the government, this is obviously a big win, an endorsement of its economic policy, and the timing couldn't have been better. Tomorrow is the final phase of voting in the general election, so strong growth gives a boost to the incumbent. And there's another important takeaway. This is about India's fiscal position. The government's finances seem to be in better shape. Today, India has reported a fiscal deficit of 5.6%. The government had set a target of 5.8%. They've got 5.6%, so the deficit is actually lower. And what is fiscal deficit? It is the difference between the government's expenses and revenues. If there is a gap, if the expenditure is more than the earning, then the government has to borrow money or sell some assets to cover expenses, because they're spending more than they're earning. But now this gap or deficit seems to be narrowing, and the government has met both its revenue and tax collection targets. So the finances are well managed. In the last budget speech, India's finance minister had set an even more ambitious target to rein in the fiscal deficit. Listen to this.
We continue on the path of fiscal consolidation, as announced in my budget speech of 2021-22, to reduce fiscal deficit below 4.5% by 25-26. The fiscal deficit in 2024-25 is estimated to be 5.1% of GDP, adhering to that path.
Right now they are at 5.6%. So far the government seems to be on track. And what are the takeaways for the people of India? How do these GDP numbers affect the people? This growth indicates stability. At the macro level, India remains largely unaffected by the uncertainty in the global economy, and this is likely to continue for the rest of the year. India's Reserve Bank has put out a new projection. It expects the economy to keep growing at 7%. This is till March next year. So that's all good. But there are some signs of short-term distress. For instance, consumption numbers look sluggish. Private consumption remained unchanged at 4% in the last quarter. It did not grow. What is private consumption? The everyday expenses of people on stuff like food and clothes, your electricity and water bills, even your spending on holidays, all of this is covered under private consumption, the money that you and I spend. And it represents almost 60% of the GDP. If private consumption remains static, if it does not grow, it means that people are not spending money. They're reluctant to part with their money, and it's never good for any economy. So why is private consumption sluggish in India? The next set of numbers could explain why. Households are taking on more liabilities, more debts. And this accounts for 5.7% of the GDP now, which is at an all-time high. Plus, the savings of Indian households have shrunk. 10 years ago, these savings made up more than 7% of the economy. Today, they are at 5.2%, which is a record low. And this could be a reflection of the job market. It remains tough. India's working population is rising by the year, but there are fewer new jobs being created. And now wages too could be declining. Again, we have some data. Wages in urban India are falling by close to 3% every year. Even having an MBA does not guarantee a job anymore, and I'm not the one saying this. Deloitte has published a report. It says fewer MBA graduates will be placed this year. They're projecting a 33% drop. This is the drop in campus placement budgets compared to last year, 33% lower. It could mean fewer jobs or lower salaries or both. So while India's growth numbers look promising, the benefits of this growth remain largely untapped, and that is the challenge that India's next government will have to address. Recently, a very special aircraft flew from the UK to India. Very few people knew about it because the cargo was sensitive. Around 100 tons of gold. And before you ask, no, it was not some illegal smuggling ring. This is as legal as it gets. This gold belongs to India's central bank, the RBI, or the Reserve Bank of India. Until now, it was stored at the Bank of England in London. But the RBI has brought it back, 100 tons of gold. It's happened for the first time since 1991. Now, I know you have questions, so let's go one by one. Why does RBI have gold? Well, every central bank in the world has gold reserves because unlike currencies, gold is stable. Say your country falls into an economic crisis or you're running low on dollars, you can use this gold to bail yourself out. So every country has gold reserves. In fact, central banks own 17% of all the gold ever mined, 17%. And how much does the RBI have? The Reserve Bank of India. They have around 822 tons of gold. More than half of this was stored abroad, outside India, in the Bank of England and the Bank of International Settlements. Which brings us to the second question. Why was it stored abroad? Well, some of the gold was there even before independence. Indian gold was stored outside. The rest was sent out during the 1990s. Back then, India was facing an economic crisis, so the RBI kept the gold in England. It's actually common practice. The Bank of England stores 400,000 bars of gold, 4 lakh bars of gold. Some of it belongs to Britain. The rest belongs to other central banks. They keep it in London for safekeeping. But why in London? Why not in the home country? Because London is one of the most important gold markets in the world. Say you want to pledge your gold or you want to sell it and raise money, then London offers you liquidity. New York is another important gold market, which is why the Federal Reserve is also a safekeeping vault. They too store foreign gold. Now to question number 3. Why has India brought it back? For starters, you can save a lot of money. The Bank of England does not store your gold for free. They charge a fee. Now you don't have to pay it. Secondly, it boosts sovereignty. If you hold your reserves abroad, there is always a risk. What if the relations sour? What if your reserves are seized? And there are many such examples. Russia has some $300 billion of reserves stored in the West. All of it has been frozen after the Ukraine war, meaning Russia cannot access its own wealth, $300 billion. Afghanistan is another example. Their total reserves are worth $9.5 billion. Around 70% of this is held in the US. So when the Taliban came to power, the Americans froze this money. Kabul still does not have access to the reserves. Now, I'm not saying that India and Britain will fall out or that India's gold will be frozen. But it's always safer to keep it at home. Plus, there is an emotional angle. In the 1990s, India had to shift gold abroad. Every Indian knows what that feels like. Gold has a sentimental value here. Pledging it or selling it is a last resort. But in the 90s, India had no option but to do it, which is why bringing the gold back is a symbolic move, like exorcising those demons. And it's been a gradual journey for India. In 2009, New Delhi made the first step. It brought 200 tons of gold. It bought 200 tons of gold from the International Monetary Fund. It cost us around $6.7 billion. Again, the idea was the same, to diversify and consolidate India's reserves. 15 years later, another move has been made. Now, what will happen to this gold, the 100 tons that has been brought in? Well, the RBI has its own gold vaults. One is in the Mumbai office, the other is in Nagpur. So the 100 tons of gold will be stored there. It's a vote of confidence in the Indian economy. Our foreign reserves are near a record high. They stand at $464 billion. That's enough for 11 months of imports, which is why the RBI is confident. They don't foresee the need to pledge or sell this gold. Hence the decision to bring it back. I guess combined with the GDP numbers, it's one of the best days for India's economy. Our next story is about Ukraine. It got a massive shot in the arm from its biggest backers, the US. This is what reports say. Ukraine can now use American weapons to strike Russian territory. So far, Kiev's hands were partially tied. They were getting Western weapons, but there was a limit on how they could be used. The Western weapons could not be used to strike targets inside Russia. They were only meant for defense. But it seems Joe Biden has finally bowed to pressure from his fellow NATO allies. They wanted Biden to unshackle Ukraine for a while now, and it seems he's finally given in. What will this mean for Ukraine? How far into Russia can they strike, and how will Moscow respond to this escalation? Our next report has the details.
Escalation, well, Russia has escalated by invading another country, and Russia has escalated just the last weeks by opening a new front where they are hitting Ukraine from inside Russia. And of course, to assume that Ukraine should not hit back is in no way reasonable, because Ukraine must be able to defend their territory, also of course by hitting the artillery, the missiles which are launched against them.
That was Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO. He's echoing what some NATO member states have been saying for a while, that Ukraine should be allowed to hit military installations inside Russian territory. It started with the UK in early May. The British Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, said Ukraine had the right to use British weapons to conduct strikes inside Russia. This Tuesday, two other major NATO members gave their approval. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that Ukraine should be allowed to defend itself, even if that means hitting targets inside Russia. NATO members have also been building pressure on the bloc's biggest and most lethal member, the US. And it seems to have worked, because yesterday we saw reports like this. The Biden administration has quietly given Ukraine permission to strike inside Russia. The words secretly and quietly show that Biden may not have wanted Russia to find out so soon. But Washington has only partially untied Ukraine's hands. Ukraine can now use American weapons on Russian soil, but only near Kharkiv. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city. It's barely 30 kilometers away from the Russian border, and Moscow has been pummeling Ukrainian forces around Kharkiv for weeks. Kyiv has found it impossible to defend against this, because Russia has been launching these attacks from inside its own territory. This posed a big challenge for Ukraine, since it had to wait until the missiles crossed the border before shooting them down, and it is why Kharkiv is in danger of capitulation. Russia is reportedly amassing its troops near Kharkiv, but because they are inside Russian territory, so far Ukraine could not do anything about them, at least not with US-supplied weapons. Now, with Biden's covert thumbs up, Kyiv can attack Russian troops and bases, using American howitzers, HIMARS, Grads, and everything else. American anti-aircraft systems like the Patriot can now be fired into Russian airspace. This is a massive escalation. Today, the Kremlin spokesperson said, and I quote, "We know that attempts are already being made to launch attacks on Russian territory using American-made weapons. This is enough for us, and it more than eloquently demonstrates the degree of involvement of the United States in this conflict." Here's what Russia's defense minister said.
Russia's military grouping is forcing the enemy out of their positions. Advances are taking place in all tactical directions. As a result of active actions in different areas of the Kharkiv region, the enemy has retreated 8-9 kilometers.
So Russia will push on with its offensive. But will the changes in US policy change equations on the battlefield?
Our next story is from South Africa, where counting is underway after the general election. The election took place on Wednesday. Millions of South Africans cast their ballots. And now they're eagerly waiting for the results. The final count should come out this weekend. But partial results are already here. Around 3/4 of the votes have been counted so far, and the trends suggest that a massive change is about to take place. The African National Congress, the ANC, is on the back foot. The ANC is the party that has ruled South Africa for 30 years. It is the party of Nelson Mandela, the party that helped end institutional racism in the country. That's apartheid. They've ruled the country ever since, winning every election since 1994 with an absolute majority. But that may be about to change, because the partial count says the ANC will not cross the 50% mark. At present, the ANC's seat share is under 42%. With about 3/4 of the votes counted, it will be difficult for the party to reverse its fortunes. And this means that for the first time since apartheid ended, South Africa is looking at a coalition government. Opinion polls before the election said that this was going to be the most likely outcome. That to stay in power, the ANC will have to tie up with the other parties. Opposition parties have been looking forward to this.
Look, I mean, I think it's a very good day for South Africa. When I said, tomorrow is a better country, well, today is a better country. We said for the last 30 years that the way to rescue South Africa is to break the ANC's majority. We've done that. They're going to end up in the low 40s. And that obviously opens up a whole new universe for politics in South Africa.
That was the leader of South Africa's biggest opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, or DA. The DA may be looking at its best ever performance. It is currently polling at over 22%, making it the second largest party in South Africa. This is not enough for the DA to rule on its own, but they could propose to tie up with the ANC, offering a simple, stable two-party coalition in exchange for a say in governance, of course. But the DA is not the only party that can make this offer. There are currently two other parties who can do the same thing, the EFF and the MK party. The EFF, or Economic Freedom Fighters, currently have almost 10% of the vote, just enough to form a two-party coalition with the ANC. The EFF is run by this man, Julius Malema. He's a former ANC youth leader. He could offer to join hands with his former party. The coalition may get across the halfway mark, but it will not be a comfortable majority. The third option is also uncomfortable, especially for the ANC's leader, President Cyril Ramaphosa. That option is the ANC teaming up with the MK party. It is being led by former President Jacob Zuma, the MK party. They have over 12% of the vote, and they can help the ANC cross the halfway mark, but it will come at a cost. You see, Zuma and Ramaphosa are old rivals. So Zuma may not offer support unless Ramaphosa steps down. Will the ANC discard Ramaphosa to appease Zuma, or will it opt for another partner? Because one thing is certain, almost certain, the ANC will remain in power. It's as though they must choose a match from a host of potential suitors, all competing to get a taste of power. And the ANC will probably pick the least demanding partner or opt for several smaller parties, those who have between 1 to 3% of the vote share, so they can form a multi-party alliance. Meaning the ANC is still very much in the driver's seat, but this is not something to celebrate. This election shows how far their popularity has fallen. From ruling alone and unchallenged for 30 years, it has now been forced to find allies. This is a fall from grace for the ANC and a lesson. No matter what great deed you've done in the past, unless you deliver consistently, the people will punish you at the ballot box. And we've been tracking this election very closely. You can watch our special show on South Africa's election results this Sunday with my colleague, Alison Lagrange. Earlier this month, Saudi Arabia was asked a question. Would they divest from China's tech sector if the US asked them to? And the answer was a yes. Riyadh called America their #1 partner in the AI sector. But just 3 weeks later, Saudi Arabia is investing in Zifu AI. It is China's homegrown startup. It is Beijing's answer to OpenAI. The Saudis have put money in this company. So what changed? What happened to partner #1? Looks like Riyadh is trying to get the best of both the worlds. America may be ahead in the AI race, but China is fast catching up. And it looks like Saudi Arabia wants to have the cake and eat it too. Our next report has more.
OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, Google, Meta. These are some of the biggest AI companies right now. But guess what they all have in common? They are all based in America. Right now, Washington is ahead in the AI race. But what about China? Chinese AI groups have long pioneered a lot of technology, like surveillance. They have had global investors. But when it came to generative intelligence, China missed the boat. They did not build deep learning systems or large language models until ChatGPT burst onto the scene. That's when they took notice. But by then, Washington and Beijing were already at loggerheads. There were restrictions on semiconductor exports to China. Foreign investors stayed away. But it looks like China has still found an investor. It's Saudi Arabia. They are investing in Zifu AI, China's answer to OpenAI. The company was founded in 2019 by a group of computer science graduates. It was among the first Chinese firms to win government approval for a public rollout. Since then, Zifu has released a chatbot. It also plans to launch a high-quality text-to-video tool, almost like OpenAI's Sora. It has secured backing from the government, as well as from investors like Alibaba and Tencent. Right now, it's the country's most prominent artificial intelligence startup. It's part of China's 4 new AI tigers, along with others like Moonshot AI, Baichuan, and Minimax. So it makes sense for Riyadh to choose Zifu. According to reports, Saudi Arabia took part in a $400 million investment round through Prosperity 7, the state-owned oil giant Aramco's venture capital arm. Reports suggest that this deal values Zifu at $3 billion. Sources say that Saudi Arabia did not want Silicon Valley to dominate the sector, so they've gone with an alternative. But will this be a good bet? China may be behind in the AI race right now, but it could catch up, and the reason is its large consumer base. Nearly everyone in the country uses the super app WeChat. That leaves companies with a trove of information and lesser concerns for things like privacy. It could create AI models that are just as powerful as their American counterparts, which is why Washington is trying to prevent that. It has asked countries to stop supporting investments in China's tech sector. So then, why is Riyadh doing this? Well, it's a gamble they're taking. Last month, a report suggested that Saudi Arabia would divest from China if forced to do so. Riyadh said the US is the #1 partner for them when it comes to AI, chips, and the semiconductor industry. But at this point, their words and actions don't match. It looks like Riyadh is trying to get the best of both worlds while they still can.
The world's biggest election is nearing its end. It's been long, it's been heated, and it's been fun to watch. We've seen massive public rallies, huge roadshows, and a fiercely fought campaign. Just one more phase remains now. After that, it's a wait for the results. But tonight, we're not looking ahead, we are looking back. What were the highlights of this campaign? How will we remember the 2024 election? We can think of 4 major highlights. The first is the strategies. The opposition came with a lot of promises. They promised a caste census, a legal minimum support price for farmers, more government jobs, and more government quotas. The ruling BJP called it freebies. The opposition called it social justice. And what was the strategy of the other side, the BJP? Well, it was pinned on Prime Minister Modi. Even the party manifesto was called Modi's Guarantee. He addressed 206 public rallies this time. He also gave 80 different interviews. Compare that to 2019 when he addressed 142 rallies. So clearly, the Prime Minister was more invested this time, also more combative. He made some explosive allegations against the opposition, the biggest being on wealth redistribution. Prime Minister Modi said the Congress party would snatch gold away from Indian women. It was probably the biggest showdown of this election. Highlight number 2, the social media war. 2014 was probably India's first social media election. 2019 went a step further, and this one fully embraced the online game. Plus, it came in the middle of an artificial intelligence wave, so political parties combined the two. We saw them making reels, using AI to mock rivals and also to spread their message. Let me show you some numbers. The BJP added almost 400,000 subscribers on X. That's between March and May. 4 lakh subscribers added. The Congress party added more than 300,000. The third highlight was the heat. Temperatures touched new records in India, especially in the north. Around 18 people died in the state of Bihar today. 10 of them were election personnel. The Election Commission did try to address this in some polling stations. Paramedics were on standby. Even mist machines and cold water dispensers were set up. In Haryana, the locals pitched in. They handed out cold drinks and fruits to voters. I guess that's the beauty of Indian democracy. Same for campaigners. Imagine addressing so many rallies in this heat. It's bound to sap your energy. Though Congress leader Rahul Gandhi found a solution, he emptied a bottle of water on his head. Take a look.
गर्मी है काफी.
And these are star campaigners. At least they have the luxury of cars and helicopters. Think about the local workers or the supporters who line up for rallies. They deserve a lot of credit. Which brings us to the final highlight, the mind-boggling logistics. We're talking about the biggest election in history. 969 million voters, more than 1 million polling stations, 7 phases, 744 political parties and more than 8,300 candidates. Imagine the effort required. Some scattered violence has been reported, but things have largely been peaceful, which in itself is an achievement. We are talking about almost 1 billion voters, people with different ideologies. Getting them to trust and follow the system is key to success. Any young democracy out there should learn from this. I know democracy stock is falling worldwide. Let's hope India's elections can boost it. The UK is going to polls in July, and Rishi Sunak is back with his videos. But this time it is not some fancy skit. He's just talking to the camera, and he starts with an apology. He says, sorry for making TikTok political. Looks like the UK Prime Minister has been missing out on some news because TikTok has been political for a while. His video did not do it. In fact, 2024 is being called the year of TikTok elections. It's the new battleground for polls. It's where elections are fought and even won. Despite security concerns, leaders across the world are joining this Chinese social media platform to woo the youth. The question is, at what cost? Our next report tells you.
TikTok, sorry to be breaking into your usual politics-free feed, but I'm making a big announcement today.
That was Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of UK. Looks like he had some FOMO. Like the world leaders, he wanted to check out TikTok. This video is on the Conservative Party page. They have around 23 million followers.
Sorry to be breaking into your usual politics.
Sunak says sorry for bringing politics to TikTok. But in case he did not know, TikTok has long been about politics. In fact, it's the new election battleground. Take the UK for example. 9 million people use TikTok here. Most of them under the age of 30. That means the app is crucial to reach out to the youth. And with the country heading to polls, that's exactly what parties are doing.
Did I disagree with him? Frequently.
Both the Labour and the Conservative Party have made their own TikTok accounts. They are only a week old. And they both have very different strategies. The Conservative Party has taken the easy route, with Rishi Sunak simply talking to the camera.
I have to be blunt with you.
The Labour, however, did put more effort. like funny skits, satire.
I am willing to make.
Clearly in the social media race, the Labour is leading. But this isn't just an UK phenomenon. 2024 is being dubbed the election year. 63 countries are going to polls, nearly 3 billion will vote, and influencing them is one social media app, TikTok. World leaders are on it. Political parties are on it. Why? Because they want to court the youth. Take the United States for example. They plan to ban TikTok, but their own president, he is on the social media platform, making videos, campaigning, trying to woo the young. And why would he not? America has 170 million monthly TikTok users, almost half of the country's population. The young voters helped Biden seal his victory in 2020, and his campaign hopes it can count on them in 2024 as well.
We cannot lose this campaign for the good of the country.
In Pakistan, Imran Khan could not campaign. He was in jail during the elections, so his party held virtual rallies on TikTok.
I would like to call on all who believe in democracy and peace.
In Indonesia, an army general got a makeover on the app. Prabowo Subianto went from being feared to becoming a cute grandfather-like figure on TikTok. And that won him the elections. In Germany, one party is more active than any other on TikTok. It's the far-right Alternative for Germany, and they are looking to make gains. But while TikTok may be popular, it comes with the baggage of China. There are concerns about national security. Many countries have banned the app on government devices. They have issued warnings against it. But at this point, some countries are too deep into this. It's like a deal with the devil. They may not like TikTok, but they can't ignore it either. Because ironically, old politicians rely on young voters to remain in power.
As we head into the weekend, let me ask you a question. What are your plans for the weekend? Maybe you'll meet friends, finish some chores, or vegetate in front of Netflix. But do you plan to get some rest? How will you recharge your mental batteries? Will you spend time alone with your thoughts? That last bit may sound creepy, lonely, even scary. But this weekend, we want you to give it a shot. Because me time can show you a good time, and science proves this. Solitude offers physical and emotional benefits. But before we go on, let me clarify one thing. Solitude is not the same as loneliness. How we feel about time alone depends on whether we have chosen it. Loneliness is emotionally taxing. It means that we are not connected to others as we would like to be. On the other hand, solitude is intentional. It refers to seeking out time to spend alone, and it is almost always a positive experience. According to a survey, seeking out solitude increases well-being. So, fun fact, deliberate alone time makes us less lonely. Me time often leaves us feeling restored and refreshed. It reduces stress and regulates mood. It increases creativity, cognitive skills, and productivity. Research proves all of this, and many greats would agree. You see, we admire successful people. We want to know their morning routines and their diet plans. We want to work as much as they do and as hard as they do. But amid all this, we forget to ask, how do they recuperate? For many, the answer has always been alone time. Take Albert Einstein, for example. Apparently, he loved to sail. Some of his best ideas came to him when he was sailing alone and enjoying his me time. Apple founder Steve Jobs had a similar routine. He was known to take long stretches of alone time. That's when he came up with divergent ideas. Bill Gates, I'm sure, can relate. As the boss of Microsoft, twice a year, he took 1 week and escaped to a forest cabin. Apparently, he still does it regularly. Bill Gates calls it his Think Week, where he reads books, papers, drinks a lot of Diet Coke, and does a lot of thinking, which usually leads to big ideas. Like the launch of Internet Explorer in 1995. Sounds fascinating, doesn't it? But let's be realistic. We can't all leave civilization to find solitude. Most of us cannot afford to do that. Many of us don't want to do it. But let me tell you something. You don't have to. You can still find alone time. Experts say what you have to do is take your solitude pulse. If you find yourself getting depleted, ask yourself, can you benefit from stepping away? How much time do you need? How do you want to spend that time? You can find solitude anywhere. You can go for a swim or read a book. There is no right or wrong here, except spending time alone with screens. That won't work because that does more harm than good. And there is no standard amount of time that people should be alone either. On average, people who spend more than 75% of their time alone feel lonely. People who spend less than 25% of their time alone also feel lonely. So the key is to stay away from extremes and find your sweet spot. Humans need a balance of going solo and being social. After all, humans are social creatures. We benefit from interacting with others, which is part of the reason why solitude gets a bad rep. Too chatty in school? Sit alone in a corner. Have no friends? Eat lunch alone. Alone time is often equated with suffering. It is used as a punishment. But it is time to break that cycle. Much like sociability, solitude can be a choice. We say, choose wisely. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. North Korea conducted firing drills simulating preemptive attacks on South Korea. In Jerusalem, thousands marched in a subdued, heavily secured pride parade after months of war. And citizens take over the streets of Venezuela dressed as red dancing devils. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1962, the architect of the Holocaust, Adolf Eichmann, was hanged in Israel. He was responsible for the killing of almost 6 million Jews. He spent some 14 years in hiding. In 1960, a Mossad unit kidnapped him from Buenos Aires. He was put on trial in Israel and later hanged. We are leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.
제3제대가 참가했습니다. 신나는 천지를 뒤흔드는 요란한 폭음이 터지는 속에 괴력을 자랑하며 선멸의 불줄기들이 조국의 푸른 하늘에 우리의 주권 사수 의지, 대적 대응 의지
Morocco is widely known for its culture, cuisine, and architecture. But the North African country rarely gets enough credit for its renewable and sustainable energy efforts. From inventing the world's fastest lithium battery to introducing drought-resistant crops, Morocco is championing the global fight against climate change. Now, the country is venturing into the electric vehicles market, pioneering the future of electric cars. An abundance of minerals like cobalt, phosphate, and lithium has enabled the country to produce higher quantities of lithium batteries in a reasonable time frame. These batteries are an important resource used in the manufacturing of electric vehicles. And as the news spreads to more automobile brands, Morocco has been swamped with demand. As of today, more than 250 automobile and car parts making firms operate out of Morocco. These include Chinese, Japanese, American and Korean factories. These firms make seats, engines, wheels and other car parts at the Tangiers automotive city. Meanwhile, Netherlands-based Stellantis produces its famous Peugeots, Opels and Fiats at its plant in Kenitra. Of these, Renault is the largest employer. The French company calls Morocco the Sandero land. That's because it produces nearly all of its Dacia Sandero cars in the country.
Morocco became a strategic pillar in the industrial strategy of the group at the international level. We have an annual production capacity of 440,000 vehicles that will reach 500,000 by 2025. This will allow the cars we build in Morocco, made in Morocco, to be exported to more than the 70 countries to which we are currently exporting.
The auto industry now accounts for 22% of Morocco's GDP and contributes about $14 billion in exports. Morocco's trade minister says that they have been able to achieve this by expanding its ports, free trade zones and highways. The country offers subsidies of up to 35% for manufacturers to put factories in the rural outskirts of Tangiers. Moreover, steady approvals and construction of factories are an added bonus. The government promises to get the approvals for new factories and finish construction in as little as 5 months.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.